Egypt's greatest pharaoh lost his most famous battle. Ramesses II spent decades carving his version of events onto temple walls across Egypt. His enemy kept different records, in a different language, in a different empire. And when archaeologists found both, the gap between them became the evidence. Two sets of records, two superpowers, one battle. And the distance between what was claimed and what was real is one of the oldest propaganda operations in human history. This is no history. We read what rulers actually wrote to each other, not what they claimed to their subjects. To understand why Kadesh mattered so much, you have to understand the world it happened in. In the mid to late 14th century BCE, roughly 1360 to 1330 BCE, during the reigns of Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten, the ancient Near East was not a chaos of warring tribes. It was a structured international system, with superpowers, client states, and diplomatic protocols as sophisticated as anything that came later. Egypt, under Amenhotep III, controlled Canaan, the coastal strip of land running roughly through modern Israel, Lebanon, and southern Syria. Cities like Megiddo, Hazor, and Jerusalem were not independent. They were vassals. They paid tribute. They sent their sons to Egyptian courts, and when they needed protection, they wrote letters. Those letters still exist. In 1887, an Egyptian woman digging in the ruins of Amarna, the capital built by the pharaoh Akhenaten, pulled clay tablets from the ground. She didn't know what she had. Scholars eventually identified 382 tablets. They became known as the Amarna Letters. What made them remarkable wasn't just their survival, it was their language. Canaanite city-states, vassals of Egypt, were writing to the Egyptian pharaoh in Akkadian cuneiform, not Egyptian hieroglyphics, not their own local scripts. Akkadian, the language of Mesopotamia, the same language used by the Hittites. Akkadian was the primary diplomatic lingua franca of the Bronze Age. When Canaanite city-states needed to reach the pharaoh, they typically wrote in Akkadian. When the Hittite king corresponded with Egypt, he also used Akkadian. It was the shared language that bridged these rival powers, a common medium for a world of competitors who each kept their own official records in their own scripts at home. This detail matters, because it means that when archaeologists find these tablets, they can read what different powers actually said to each other, not the polished official version, but the raw diplomatic correspondence, the complaints, the demands, the flattery, the fear. And what those letters reveal is a Canaan that was not a unified people, but a patchwork of competing city-states, all operating within the Egyptian imperial system. Canaanite rulers begged for Egyptian troops to protect them from neighbors. They accused each other of disloyalty. They promised endless devotion to the pharaoh while quietly negotiating with everyone else. This was the system Ramesses II inherited when he took the throne around 1279 BCE, and it was a system under pressure. The Hittites, based in Anatolia, roughly modern Turkey, had been expanding for generations. Under their king, Muwatalli II, they pushed into northern Syria. That put them directly in conflict with Egyptian interests. And it put the city of Kadesh, a strategic stronghold on the Orontes River, right at the center of the collision. Around 1274 BCE, Ramesses II marched north with a major force including 4 primary divisions of the Egyptian army, named after the gods Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth. He was young, ambitious, and convinced this campaign would define his reign. What happened near Kadesh is one of the most documented battles of the ancient world, and one of the most contested. According to Egyptian sources, Ramesses was ambushed. His advance force was routed. He found himself nearly surrounded by Hittite chariots. And then, in the official account, something extraordinary happened. Ramesses personally rallied, charged into the Hittite lines, and drove them back, single-handed, against impossible odds. He carved this story onto temple walls across Egypt, at Abu Simbel, at the Ramesseum, at Karnak, at Luxor. Wherever you went in Egypt, the message was the same. Ramesses II had faced annihilation at Kadesh and emerged victorious. He even commissioned a long poem about it, the Poem of Pentor. It is one of the earliest examples of military propaganda literature ever written, and it is spectacular. Ramesses charges alone. The gods fight beside him. The enemy breaks and flees. For 3,000 years, that was the story. Egypt won at Kadesh. Ramesses was invincible. Then, archaeologists started reading the Hittite records. The Hittite capital was Hattusa, in what is now central Turkey. When archaeologists excavated it in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they found an archive. Thousands of tablets. Administrative records, religious texts, diplomatic correspondence. Among them were Hittite accounts of Kadesh. The Hittite version does not describe a crushing defeat. It describes a battle in which Mu'tali II's forces engaged the Egyptians, inflicted serious casualties on the Ra division, and held their ground. Ramesses withdrew. The Hittites held Kadesh. That is not a victory for Ramesses II. That is a stalemate at best. But here is the piece of evidence that closes the argument. About 15 years after Kadesh, following years of negotiation and diplomatic exchange, Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III signed a peace treaty around 1259 BCE. It is the oldest surviving peace treaty in human history. Copies survive in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and Akkadian cuneiform. A replica hangs at the United Nations headquarters in New York today. Read the treaty carefully and you find something revealing. It is a treaty between equals. Neither side claims superiority. Neither side demands the other's submission. Both kings agree to mutual defense, extradition of refugees, and non-aggression. The language throughout is brother to brother. You do not sign an equal treaty with a power you just defeated. If Ramesses had genuinely won at Kadesh, there would be no peace treaty. There would be tribute, submission, and conquest. Instead, there is a carefully negotiated agreement between two exhausted superpowers who could not afford to keep fighting. The propaganda held for 3,000 years. The Hattusa archive dismantled it in a century of archaeology. Now, step back from Kadesh for a moment, because the Amarna Letters reveal something even larger about this world, and about the Canaanites, the Israelites, and the people living between these two powers. The 382 Amarna tablets were primarily created during the reign of Akhenaten, roughly 1353 to 1336 BCE, with some correspondence from his father Amenhotep III's later years. They date broadly to the mid to late 14th century BCE. They include letters from Canaanite city-state rulers, from Babylonian kings, from Mitanni rulers, and from the Hittites themselves. What they show is a Canaan that was not a single nation, not a unified people, but a patchwork of competing city-states all operating within the Egyptian imperial system. The ruler of Megiddo wrote to Amenhotep III asking for Egyptian archers to protect him from a neighboring city. The ruler of Jerusalem, called Urusalim in the tablets, wrote to the pharaoh seeking protection from various threats, including from neighboring rulers and groups like the Habiru, revealing just how precarious the position of these Canaanite city-states really was. The ruler of Byblos sent letter after letter begging for military support that never arrived. These are not the Canaanites of popular imagination, a monolithic people waiting to be conquered. They are administrators, diplomats, and survivors, navigating between Egyptian demands and Hittite pressure, writing in a foreign language to a distant pharaoh who often didn't respond. And this brings us to one of the myths the evidence quietly corrects. The traditional reading of the biblical book of Joshua describes the Israelites as a people who arrived from outside Canaan and conquered it. But the archaeological and textual record is considerably more complicated. Around 1208 BCE, the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah carved a victory stele listing peoples his forces had defeated. One line reads, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more." This is the earliest known mention of Israel as a people outside the Bible, and it places them already inside Canaan as one group among many, not as recent arrivals from outside. The picture that emerges from archaeology is of a Canaan that was always ethnically and culturally layered. Canaanites, early Israelites, Philistines, Phoenicians, populations that developed, mixed, and diverged over centuries within the same territory. Not a clean conquest, a long, complicated emergence. The Amarna Letters give us the texture of that world before it was simplified by later narratives. Here is what all of this adds up to. The Bronze Age Near East produced some of the most sophisticated political actors in human history. They built empires, managed vassal networks, negotiated in multiple languages, and signed binding international agreements. And they lied. Not in the chaotic way we sometimes imagine ancient peoples lying, improvised, unsystematic. Ramesses II understood that a temple wall carved in stone would outlast any inconvenient cuneiform tablet buried in a foreign archive. He was almost right. The Abu Simbel reliefs survived intact. The Hattusa tablets survived too, just in a different country, in a different language, waiting for someone to read them both at the same time. What saved the truth was that Muwatalli II's scribes kept their own records. When archaeology found both archives, the gap between them became the evidence. Not a gap in the stone, a gap between what Ramesses claimed and what the Hittites wrote down. This is what cross-referencing enemy archives does. It doesn't just correct one story, it reveals the mechanism of how official history is made, and how it can hold for millennia until someone finds the other side's paperwork. Ramesses II's propaganda held for 3,000 years. It took clay tablets buried in Hittite soil, written in Akkadian, the shared language of Bronze Age diplomacy, to break it. This treaty reminds us that the version carved in stone is almost always the version of whoever controlled the chisel. If Ramesses II could rewrite Kadesh for 3,000 years, what else did Bronze Age powers, the Hittites, the Egyptians, the Canaanite city-states, agree to hide from their own people? We read what rulers actually wrote to each other, not what they claimed to their subjects. I'm here to help you know the difference. Which propaganda claim from your own era do you think future archaeologists will debunk, the way Muwatalli II's tablets debunked Ramesses? Stay skeptical of the version written in stone.